I was 4.5 months old when my father was murdered in the Bronx. My father, a loving family man who was adored by the community, died a hero, taking a gunshot for a friend. The loss of my father had a profound impact on my life. It led to my searching to understand the meaning and purpose of my life through my own suffering and that of others. I would like to talk about feeling deeply for the suffering of others and turning compassion into passionate action. As I matured, I was driven to climb mountains in search of answers, and that is how I found myself in 1995 on the rooftop of the world. My husband and I were trekking under these blue skies, sunny conditions, and we arrived at our base camp of Imjase, a mountain in the shadow of Everest. However, at 2 a.m., we were awakened by Paladin, our lead Sherpa, who was scraping excessive amounts of snow, pummeling our collapsing tent with ferocious whipping winds around us. It was incredible. This snowstorm from the Bay of Bengal had resulted in blizzard conditions that had not occurred in 50 years. Overnight, 4 feet of snow had fallen, and as a result, our push to the summit was aborted. Over the night, we outfitted our porters and Sherpas who were unprepared, and then prepared ourselves for the trek back. Our team of 8 in the morning stood in a line, prepared to deal with this arduous trek back. We were trying to blaze a trail through snow that was chest deep. I knew through these blizzard white-out conditions with so much snow that this trek back, this journey, was not going to be measured in hours, but certainly days. And then all of a sudden, I started hearing these thunderous crashes around me. I heard this whoosh, and I felt a punch in my back, and I was 4th in line, and there were 4 behind me, but I fell into my husband at that time, and I was buried in snow up to my shoulders, and I whipped around to see who punched me in my back, and I screamed, "They're gone! The guys are gone! What happened? Where did they go?" They vanished. And all of a sudden, this red glove shot up out of the snow. And we uncovered 3, but Sange was missing. I was like, where did he go? What happened? We couldn't find him. And Paladin, that lead Sherpa, insisted, because there were so many threats of avalanches around us, that we needed to move on. So we were, of course, horrified at the time because couldn't leave somebody, but he insisted that we go, so we went along with him. And then, like 15 minutes later, I hear this yodel. And who else could be up in these mountains with us? What was, through this blizzard conditions, we heard this yodel. Is it somebody who's going to help save us, help save Sange? Well, it turned out to be Sange. He had uncovered himself from this avalanche that had swept him away. We celebrated, you can imagine, right? It was an incredible experience. But there were so many threats of avalanches around that we moved on. And at night, we dug a foxhole, and my husband and I, through the night, flipped each other like pancakes to stay warm because we were shaking so in that cold, frigid air. The next day, we were crawling and crawling for hours upon hours. And I kind of moved into this altered state of consciousness. And my mind and body separated, and I saw this white light. And I spoke to my body from above and told myself, keep going, you're doing the right thing. At that time, my father came to me for the first time in my life. And I spoke to him. Okay, Daddy, it's our time to be together again, finally. And he said to me, no, no, my love, it is not your time. Your children need you. Keep going, keep going. I will be here for your journey. So then the next 2 days and 2 nights were just replete with these incredible challenges. You're not going to believe this, but we followed our team into a raging, freezing, icy cold river that felt like it was stabbing us. And then they deserted us. They went off somewhere, and we were alone in this river that with these rapids, we were just being tossed around. It felt like seaweed in an ocean. And after a while, I just started laughing uncontrollably because this was ridiculous. We're standing here alone in an icy, freezing, raging cold river at night. Can you imagine? So after a while, we got out of the river and we're crawling and crawling, trying to find our way, and crawled across glaciers with deep crevasses and mountains. And the next day, we were reunited with our team. And we learned that our youngest porter, Ram Kumar, had passed during the night. Oh my gosh, we were so depleted and so sad, crying. But then we stumbled onto this stone, snow-covered hut that trekkers had claimed refuge at the very beginning of that snowstorm. So they warmed our frozen bodies and our blackened, frostbitten fingers and toes. And then they went outside and they padded out an area of snow outside the hut. And then, wait till you hear this, they took some rocks and they wrote the word help in the snow. It's like, holy mackerel. That sounds like, right, a Hollywood script? Is that right? Well, actually, a helicopter the next day found that signal and rescued us. Thankfully, they took us down to Kathmandu, where we learned that 63 people had been buried and perished in avalanches, more so than any other day in history. Emaciated, having lost 1/3 of my body weight, in wheelchairs, with hands and feet wrapped in bandages. My husband and I watched ourselves on CNN as we crossed the world on the way back home. We were Tom Brokaw's news for days. We were on the Today Show. We were on talk shows and other news stations and newspapers. My husband suffered amputations to his toes and 4 fingers. This was extraordinary suffering, incredible. But we were home. We were home to our family and friends, our children, and they just shared with us this incredible amount of love and deep compassion. And since we had arrived just before Thanksgiving, it was an incredible celebration, an extraordinary thankful Thanksgiving, you can imagine. So after healing, it was time for us to give back. And we wanted to express our deep gratitude to those who saved us. So, believe it or not, we returned to Nepal in 2003. And this time, trekking, we were with Subhas, it was our lead Sherpa, and he asked if we would help rebuild a school that was about to crumble on some children. So here it was our opportunity to give back. And it was something we said to him, absolutely, this is perfect. And we came home to San Diego and raised money, not just for one school, but for 3 schools in the Himalayas. So we thought that was great. And then in 2005, I attended a Women's Peacemaker Conference at the University of San Diego. Listened to Sister Pauline, who is selected as a woman peacemaker from northern Uganda. And she shared with us about the Lord's Resistance Army War. And talked to us about the 100,000 children who had been murdered and the 66,000 children who had been abducted from their villages and forced to become child soldiers. They were even forced to kill their families and friends. It was just too horrific to even think about it. And the horrific suffering that we had experienced in the Himalayas, it just grew so intensely in me that I developed an amazing compassion and empathy. And I wanted to give back as we could for Uganda as we had done for Nepal. So we asked Sister Pauline what we could do to help. She pleaded with us to help children who had become orphans at this point. So we said we would, and we raised money for 24 students to return to school in northern Uganda. However, we wanted to be accountable for that money. We wanted to ensure that those children were the ones that were in school. So in 2007, we went over to northern Uganda, and thankfully, we found the children in school, but we arrived there, and it was just an unimaginable scene. We saw these children in their schools, but the classrooms, sometimes didn't even have a teacher. And there were dirt floors and only a pitted blackboard in the classroom. There was no running water, no electricity, there were no textbooks, no computers, no libraries, no access to current information. So I said, well, how could they move forward? And then we went out and we saw these bombed out vehicles everywhere. And we knew that there were 1.7 million people living in IDP camps packed together. And in those camps, there was no running water, no electricity, no sanitation, and there was so much disease. It was unbelievable. There were people dying of malaria, of typhoid, and there was just so much death. And then I spoke to these girls who were child mothers. They had been raped in the LRA war. There were women who had been walking had to pump water, and they had jerry cans on their head that they would use for cooking, cleaning, and washing. And then we saw women with firewood on their heads, like they had to cook in a hole in a hut. So after hearing about the girls who were child mothers, the care, I then realized the suffering was so horrific from the LRA war that I realized then why I was in northern Uganda. I listened to the children tell stories about their parents who were murdered before their eyes. You can imagine how I felt. I cried. I related to their pain and suffering. And I knew that there was something that I needed to do. I knew that I could honor my father by helping these children with whom I had shared a common bond of pain and suffering. So I asked the children to give me a story or a drawing, something that was important to them, something that may have impacted them in their lives. And I told them that I would create a book that I would share with the world that would give them their voice of their pain and suffering from the war, and that I would share this with everyone. And I just want to read a passage from The Secrets of War, told through the drawings and stories of the young people of northern Uganda. And this is Patrick's own words. And the rebels ordered my parents, "Call your children to come and witness how we're going to kill you." And my father called and said, "Come out, my son. You tell the story to your children." Then the rebels took the hoe we used for digging and hit on the head of my father, and they also do the same to my mother. After they picked the panga and used it to cut the dead bodies of my parents into small pieces, and all our compound was full of blood flowing like water, a river flowing in the ocean, and they ordered me to taste the blood of my parents. And to fear death, I did it 3 times. And that changed my life. So I knew I needed to do something. But what was I to do? The answer actually came from 11-year-old Sebastian, who asked me if he could share with me his invention that he had created from a bunch of junk parts. And so he came up to me with this jerry can that he put holes in, and he put speakers in, and then he had this white plastic basket that he had a circuit board, and he put batteries in, and he took the wires and connected it to the speakers, and music filled the space that we were in. It was amazing. And Sebastian, never having seen a television or a computer, had created a radio. It's like, that's amazing. And at that time, I knew brilliance was equally distributed. Opportunity was not. I knew that I had lost my father as an infant, but I had opportunity in my life, whereas these kids had none. So I thought about it and I said, well, we live in the 21st century here, but it looked like Uganda was living in the 10th. And I knew that the developed world had advanced because of technology, so I thought, well, why shouldn't they? And I thought, so let's bring technology. So I went home and canvassed my neighborhood and collected computers. And by the following year, I had boarded the airplane, talking my way on with overstuffed bags and 16 computers, headed for northern Uganda, where we would open up our first 3 UTouch digital centers. And that's where UTouch was born. Now, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's actually working. There are these people who had never touched a computer before. Can you imagine? Never touched a computer before, and they are taking computer lessons and life skills lessons, and they're getting jobs. Even women who never thought that they would have a job are creating their own businesses, like Gracious and Irene and Ruth. And the wonderful thing about it is that they're able to now support their own families. They're able to pay for their own food and health care and clothing, as well as their own education for their family. I hope that my story has moved you to look for your own experiences of pain and to allow yourself to feel the deep compassion that comes from suffering, and to drive your own passionate action to help heal our world. The lives you change are the lives you touch.